All right, it is now recording. Hello? Anybody? Anybody gonna join? Okay.
Roll on, man. You are recording.
Yes, I am. Hello. Okay, so I suppose I should go back through my points again, but I hope that G3 will join back in. But either way, even if they don't, I suppose since it is recording, I will go back through my points, possibly slightly faster than I did the last time. Hopefully not sounding like I'm rushing, obviously, but we'll see what happens. So the question that you asked, which I believe had to do with my first point, Matt, which is Linux uses less than 20% of the physical resources that Windows does. Why is it lighter? Well, it's a smaller footprint on the hard drive, and typically when it takes up less space on the hard drive, it is also easier on the rest of the system as well. The kernel's not as large. The firmware isn't as densely packed, I suppose. Obviously, just doesn't require as much resources within the hardware to run than Windows does. And as I was explaining. Oh, deep question. It is literally what makes the operating system able to, aside from the firmware, and it's the microcode that they use to make it so that the operating system and software can talk to the hardware in the computer. Good enough?
That'll do.
Okay.
Continue.
So, and then how is it more private? There are a few points that I mentioned in my answers to these questions. One is it doesn't use exe, the Windows exe files, so or directory files to direct to DLL to allow things to run through Windows stuff. It uses the .sh as you brought up, which, as you also brought up, it refers to libs, to the lib directories for running the different files and whatnot, instead of the DLLs, which basically DLLs are they're the library files for the exe files. But anyways, that's getting deeper than necessary. directory library files, basically. They really should have called them DLFs. But anyway, and they are largely self-contained rather than, as you stated, Matt, largely self-contained instead of being a series of references. So it makes it harder for them to crack than the Windows exe files are. The reason that I can see that Linux distributions usually run lighter than Windows is obviously depending on distribution and desktop environment versions. They take up less space in general than Windows does, and that pretty much makes them run more smoothly from what I have gathered over my years of experience. So anyway, now to be more specific, the reason why I prefer AMD Radeon builds over Intel NVIDIA or AMD NVIDIA is because the drivers and firmware are open source coded first and foremost before they're closed source coded, which makes it easier for the operating system to talk to the hardware, as I was saying earlier, the AMD Radeon hardware over the closed source, predominantly closed source coding for Intel and NVIDIA drivers and firmware. So, and then I think that pretty much covers that part. What do you think, Matt?
Huh?
I said my second bullet point runs best on AMD/Radeon based hardware is because of the fact that AMD predominantly starts their coding within open source coding languages and aims it for open source so that those who are developers within the mainstream community can work on the drivers themselves if they need to, which makes it easier for Linux to communicate with the AMD Radeon hardware over and above Intel and NVIDIA hardware. Does that about cover that bullet point there, Matt?
That'll do, man.
Okay. And bullet point 3 can run almost any Microsoft-based program either just as well or better than Windows can within the Wine compatibility layer. I'm not going to call it an emulator, even though it technically is because it's compatibility. I have done extensive testing within this situation, so I do know that it really does work. There are some programs that are still not working well enough because certain drivers aren't there, but soon enough they will be, I'm sure. Most games that run natively on Windows can or do run better within Linux through Play on Linux, Lutris, or Steam/Proton. I have found this to be true in many cases because, well, it takes up less system resources to run the programs and games. So therefore, the games will run predominantly, most of the time, will run more smoothly and somewhat faster, frame rates even, depending on the game, obviously. And for the Office/productivity software, you can pretty much find free open source software replacement, or at least stand-ins for like Microsoft Office software, the email software, email client, Gmail, Hotmail, Outlook, Yahoo. You can find open source and such as Zoho Mail or the likes, Proton Mail. I use both actually, which are safer because they are decentralized, at least in part. The Proton Mail I know is. I'm not completely sure about Zoho Mail, but I know Proton Mail is, because it works through the VPN service that they provide. For like Microsoft Office, you can use OpenOffice, you can use LibreOffice. Comes with the whole suite of Office software, for spreadsheets, LibreOffice Writer, Libre Presenter or whatever, basically like, the, Microsoft, well, my brain just blanked on me. But you get my point. Thank you, PowerPoint. Thank you, Matt. And for recording software, there's Ardour, there's OBS, and for the editing software, you can either edit within OBS or you can edit within Kdenlive, which is predominantly KDE, obviously KDE, Kdenlive, and mixing and mastering you can do within Ardour. There are plugins that you can get for different sound effects or limiters, gates, all that kind of add-on stuff you can get through the application software store. Why they call it a store when everything's free in there anyway doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but hey, that's what it is.
Whoa.
It's basically just an installation. What?
Let's get back on track, bud.
Okay. Anyway. Okay, so that was point 5. Let's go to point 6. You can build a lower cost gaming PC. This kind of goes along with one of the other points that I made. PC that can run most, if not all of the latest and most demanding titles with lesser hardware and still run with good 60 plus frames per second or excellent 120 frames per second plus on highest settings. I did not say ultra, I said highest. There is a difference in most of the newer titles these days, and even some older titles. So, that being stated, AMD/Radeon, great choices. More games are coming over to the Radeon fold, so that makes it easier for them to run more smoothly and faster frames per second wise on AMD Radeon builds. Point 7, you can set your PC within the Linux live installation media. When you're going into the install, you can literally set the partitions and set virtual memory, which uses part of your hard drive's storage for, backup RAM if need be. It will activate it if you run out of system resources. Physical system resources. And then point 8, which also goes along with point 6 and 7, due to the lower resource cost for the operating system's needs for general use and other more intense usage cases, the system will run more smoothly with less RAM storage and VRAM, which is proven by my HP, and by at least one, if not all of my brother's machines. So lower costs overall to get started. Number 9, and this really should have been number 1 on this list, security and anonymity from other users. Number 10 goes along with it and kind of explains why I say what I say. No trackers. They can't spy on you because you can literally turn off all of the built-in trackers, hardware, software, whatever, within the operating system. You can literally tell it that you don't want it to use location systems unless you enable it within the browser or within whatever app you're using. You can literally sit there and tell it not to monitor your hardware usage for, so that they can diagnostical uses and whatnot. So, sending diagnostic stuff back to the devs. Granted, some people would want that because that would mean that the next updates can and will make things run more smoothly on your device. So you can turn those off if you want, or you can leave them going. It's up to you. It's up to the person using the device. And then bonus, with the minimum installation media download and flash onto the flash storage device that you're using for the live install media, it will come with only necessary files to run the operating system. A browser, calculator if need be, and word processor, and obviously the terminal. And the basic drivers and firmware to make it so it'll run on your system, if that's what you want. So you can basically have nothing but bare minimum pre-installed on your computer, depending on the operating system, on the version that you're using or wanting to use. Some don't have that option. Most of them do. So therefore, and there are other versions of Linux that will allow you to pre-install through the installation media. It will allow you to download and pre-install and update as you're installing the operating system whatever software you want on your computer. So bloatware, unnecessary, unwanted bloatware is pretty much a thing of the past with Linux, within Linux, depending on the version of Linux you use. Garuda, well, there's a lot of stuff on there that's really not necessary to have on there. But most of it, if you're a content creator or even consumer, you'll want them on there. You'll want those programs on there. Some, like the basic open source version of certain Windows games, like, I don't know, Mahjong or Minesweeper or chess or checkers or, those types of games. Not necessary, but in Garuda they have them because it is more of a gaming and content creation type operating system than anything else. So, but that's what me and my brother are using at this point in time, if I'm not mistaken. I know, Matt, that you had stated that you're repping Garuda on JP's on JP's channel. So, anyway, yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Do you have anything to add, Matt?
Not so much at the moment. I think you did a pretty decent survey of your points. Got a little off in the weeds in the middle there.
Well, rabbit trails aren't terrible depending on the situation, but yeah, I get you.
If you're trying to keep it short and sweet, keep it short and sweet, and stay on point.
My topical ADHD kicking in.
Excuses.
I'm just playing, but anyway. All right. Well, thanks for being a part of it, Matt. I really appreciate it, even though there wasn't a heck of a lot of conversation there. But hey, if it works, it works, and it keeps it short. So, and that was the point of this whole exercise here. So, thanks for listening, G. And as I said in my last live stream, I'm going to try to do at least a couple of streams a week, and possibly do streams a couple or few days a week and a few streams per day. I just need to figure out content to outline for content and whatnot for those days, for the multiple streams for those days. So when you hear about it, you'll know about it. And when I figure out about it, I will let everybody know. All right. Thanks again, guys. And again, Matt, thank you for joining in this time.